by the end of this video, you are gonna have a crazy inspiration machine. You will never have to look outside for ideas. You're just going to find them within yourself. Like this endless well of curiosity and creativity is just going to exist inside of you. It's gonna be you. Also, you'll have so many tools to get to the heart of those emotional problems that are at the core of your being, the core of your being. And then on top of that, you are also never going to need to spend all of this time scrolling online, because you're going to be so genuinely interested and invested in your own life, your own self-growth, your own creativity. It's going to be so much fun. Only if you do everything that I'm saying in this video, so follow along. The first thing I want to talk about is basically, as an artist, as a creative, there are like primarily two things you need to do, right? You need to consume information, you need to like read the books, watch the films, listen to the music, everything that's come before you, everything that's coming out now. And then the other part is practicing the art itself, right? Doing the work yourself. So unfortunately what happens is that we spend way too much time in the first part, right? Watching things and listening to things and reading things and consuming content, and we do that way more than what we actually need to do, which is practice. But that's not the only thing that's the problem. The bigger problem is also how we're doing this. So this is the irony of physical or digital input versus the invisible or abstract output. So what I mean by this is, when you're like reading a book, watching a film, or even let's say watching a helpful video, what are you doing with that information, right? So what happens is that because we're overloaded with so much information, rather than spending time with the essence of the newsletter we read or the book we read, we're just going from one reel to the next. And even when we do save the things that we like, so like bookmarking things, saving posts, taking screenshots, how often do you revisit these? Or like how often do you open your gallery, go to the bookmarks page? And I'm guessing it's not that often. So what happens is that the things that we save or the things we take screenshots of, those become invisible. And the stuff that we're actually consuming, while we're consuming it, we think about it, and then as soon as the video ends, we forget about it. So whatever thoughts we have are abstract, they're not written down anywhere, they're not processed, we're not building on those thoughts at all. So there is no output as such here. There's only constant, never-ending input. So the problem is that we don't have physical, tangible tools to process the information that we're consuming. So that's what this video deals with. So let's talk about these physical tools. One example is the Commonplace Journal. So now the Commonplace Journal has its roots all the way back to like ancient Greece, ancient Rome. All of these philosophers use them, and the Commonplace Journal is basically, it's a collection of quotations that you are getting from literature you read, or like your personal observations, your notes on interests or passions that you have. It's a collection of all of these things organized by topic or by commonplace. So that's where the name Commonplace Journal comes from. And then in the Victorian era, that's when writers, artists, philosophers, thinkers, that's when they started including personal musings and reflections on like their relationships or experiences. And they started infusing the Commonplace Journal with all of their own personal mind wandering and thinking. So that's an example of like a physical tool. But the problem with physical tools like these is that you have only so much space in a journal. It's going to get over eventually, and then soon you're just like collecting journal after journal. You have all of these thoughts spread out, you have no idea where what is located. And so if you have to retrieve something, or if you have to add a thought to an entry that already exists, you're not going to be able to add it to that location, to that page, because that page has gotten over. On the next page there's another entry. So there are constraints like that in physical writing. And so now you might think that the solution is to have a digital note-taking tool or a digital journal, but studies show that writing by hand is so much better for you than typing, because that is when you really explore your thoughts, you go deep into your thinking, your thoughts branch out. Also, studies have shown that writing by hand is when your brain makes all these connections, and that's when memory formation and information encoding happens. So writing by hand is so much better for you. And so even if you are someone who types into their laptop, or like who makes notes in their phone, or does their journaling by typing, if you try doing the exact same thing on paper, you will feel a difference. So if we come to the conclusion that writing is better for thinking, but digital tools are better for retrieval of our thoughts and organization, or just like remembering what we wrote and being able to search and find it quickly using modern note-taking apps, then it only makes sense to have a combination of these things. And again, the reason why I am saying this is because, like it's been established earlier, we spend all our time on our phones watching these videos, reading these newsletters, and then we don't do anything with them, which is why we always feel like other people are doing so much more than us, and we're not creating at the same pace as they are. So our own self-esteem is also being affected. But apart from that, we are also not getting the time to develop our own thoughts, because one reel ends and the next begins, one video ends and the next begins. So before we've had time to like think about our own response, our own opinions on what the other person is saying. We've already moved on to the next film or the next book. So, for the sake of developing your own thoughts, it's important to write. And for the sake of retrieving these thoughts, of being able to access them and organize them and keep coming back to them, digital note taking tools are important. So, what's the modern hybrid solution? Right? According to me, it is using a digital Zettelkasten along with a physical reflection journal, commonplace journal, whatever you want to call it. So let's first talk about Zettelkasten. If you haven't heard of Zettelkasten, it is basically a note-taking system invented by Niklas Luhmann. So it's also called the Slipbox, and he did it back when there weren't any digital note-taking tools. So he did it on physical slips of paper, on cards. But today, many people use the Zettelkasten system online on note-taking apps such as Obsidian, Notion, Remnote. I use Remnote. Remnote is great. This is the best system for note-taking and actually using your notes and coming back to them over a period of time. So the main feature of the Zettelkasten is that all of your information, everything gets stored in one place, in that one note-taking app only. So I've seen a lot of people online have these sort of notebook ecosystems or like journaling ecosystems where they use a million different notebooks and journals and planners and all sorts of things along with online note-taking apps. There's nothing wrong with this. The only problem I have with this sort of intricate, elaborate system is that, number one, the more resistance there is, the more complicated your system is, the harder it's going to be to sustain something like that. And then the second thing is, again, retrieval is always the problem. Suppose you have like a gratitude journal and a dream journal and like a reflection journal, and then you have something else, and then you have something else just for your passions. You're going to forget what is where. You're going to forget that you have made notes on something. You're going to forget that you have reflected on something. And it's also going to be hard for you to remember where you have written what. And then the main thing is that you won't be able to use these in an effective way, in any sort of meaningful way. If you're spending so much time making those notes, what are you doing with it? How is it actually beneficial to your life? And I get that a lot of people do things like junk journals or like pujos, and those are helpful in their own ways. There's nothing wrong with using a journal or a diary for like as a creative outlet, or sometimes you just want to do things for the aesthetic, and that's fine. But sometimes I'll see trends online, and then this trend becomes like a task. So if you're doing something only because it seems cool and fun and aesthetic online, there's going to be this kind of pressure to keep up with it, and any form of resistance just means that you're not going to be able to sustain that over time. Any sort of elaborate note-taking system where you're using a million different things just means that it's going to be hard for you to do any of those and maintain any of those consistently. So the number one feature of the Zettelkasten, have all of your things in one place. This includes like your movie list, your to-do list, your notes on like, I don't know, maybe you're interested in history and sociology, and so you have notes on those. And then you have notes on like realizations you had in therapy or from a book you read. And all of these go in the same place. That is number one. And then the second thing is, do not name any of your notes, and don't clump your notes together either. So each document or note in your note-taking app gets one topic and one topic only. And the reason for this is, the more that you categorize your information, the more that you have like one folder for ideas you have, and one folder for work stuff, and one folder for side projects. And the more you do that, the less of a chance you are giving all of these different ideas and thoughts to interact with each other, because our brains don't actually work like that, right? Like the systems that we make online, all of this categorization of folders, that's not how our brains work. Our brains will go from like one thought about work to like one thought about like a meal I just had, to another thought about where I'm going to go out tomorrow, to another like random idea about something. So if our brains collect all of this information and are constantly observing things and processing things and merging them together, and then we're having ideas, why shouldn't our second brains or our Zettelkasten systems also reflect that? Which is why the original Zettelkasten system, in that you are naming each note by giving it a number. So you don't give it a topic. So what you do is this: suppose you've just watched a video on something that's related to like emotional health, and that's given you a couple of ideas about how you can like regulate better, manage your emotions better. So now you'll make a note in your Zettelkasten about this. But something about this video has also given you an idea for how to manage your time better for work, like for productivity. And so the system of Zettelkasten is also about not making notes verbatim, but also thinking about how the note that you're taking applies to different contexts. So then that same note that you're making, you can make another note where you will write this idea that you had for productivity. And you can link these two notes together using backlinks and tags and all of these things that exist in modern note-taking apps. And so the point here is that each idea gets its separate note. No note is constrained by a folder or this rigid categorization. All of these nodes are like floating together and they're free to interact with each other, and you can link different ideas together, different thoughts together. And so the idea is to have everything in one place, and each note gets a number, not a name. There's no rigid categorization or sorting in folders happening here. So what happens over time is that as your Zettelkasten begins to grow, all of these links will form between one idea from a completely different context to another idea in another random context. So this is where creativity, originality, this is where you are going deep into yourself and discovering these things, and you're following your own curiosity rather than just sort of mindlessly consuming. You're building your own knowledge garden. So now the main point of the Zettelkasten is that you keep coming back to your notes. Unlike having all of your thoughts and ideas and inspiration scattered across like 5 different apps, now everything is in one app. So now let's say a few times a week, you can sit down with your Zettelkasten, you can just pick any random node, and then through its links and connections, you can keep exploring your knowledge garden or your Zettelkasten. The idea is to keep expanding on this. The idea is to keep building the Zettelkasten. The idea is not to collect notes, but the idea is for you as an artist, as a creative, to develop your own thinking, your own response to the things you're consuming. So the more that you sit with your Zettelkasten and you see what inspires you, you read and remember what notes you made, you add to those based on what recent observations you have about that particular topic. So you keep expanding and adding on to this. And as you do this over time, you'll see that there'll be these particular clusters of links across your Zettelkasten. And so pay attention to these clusters because they will tell you what you're most excited about, what you're most naturally drawn towards, which topics, which ideas. And that's just where more questions will emerge from, and where you'll find more answers and experiment more and add more observations to those notes. The next most important thing here is the output, right? So the problem with the earlier system, which is just consuming one thing after the other, is that there's no output happening. So the Zettelkasten system, the last step of it is that it ends with this tangible outcome. So if you're, let's say you're a writer, start a blog, create a social media account online, start a newsletter, whatever it is, put your thoughts out there based on whatever observations and notes and thoughts you're adding to your Zettelkasten. Form this tangible piece of writing, flush out your thoughts and put it out there. Also, often as an artist or creative, you're not only into like one thing, you have so many different passions, and all of these will over time start to merge and inform each other via the Zettelkasten. So the end goal is always creation, and then whatever you put out there, whatever you share with the world, you can then record those learnings again into your Zettelkasten. That's again going to lead to different ideas, again branching out into different thoughts. Then you can create the next piece of art and put that out there, and so then this becomes a self-feeding cycle. The Zettelkasten is one part of this hybrid process, and the other part is your commonplace journal or your physical reflection journal. And this is the one where I would say you should write by hand. The other thing is not to have any sort of rigid rules of like when and what time you're going to write, and I will do 3 pages of writing in the morning first thing, I'll do morning pages and I'll do this and that, and all these things are useful. But again, if something has rigid rules, you're not going to be able to maintain it for a long time. So instead of having rules like, okay, I'm going to hit like a word count or a page count, or I'm going to sit at this time every single day and journal, I would just say journal frequently. So write by hand, don't have strict rules, journal frequently so that you are in touch with yourself, you know what's going on with you, you are facing the things that you're avoiding the rest of the times, especially if something is painful or there's something that you're feeling emotional about, something that's weighing on you. I would say journal about that. You don't have to do it in the moment you're feeling this pain, but I would say journal frequently, at least a few times a week, and don't have any rules. It could be like a 1 page or a half page entry. Sometimes it could go like a few pages long. Whatever it is, whatever you're feeling in the moment, just let it come out and don't stop it, and just be honest with yourself when you're journaling, and that's pretty much all you need to do. Now the most important part, this is where the reflection journal or the commonplace journal sort of merges with Zettelkasten, and this is when you take these journal entries of yours and just the kind of core learnings or realizations you've had, transfer them to your Zettelkasten. So like I said earlier, Zettelkasten is the collection of everything, not just your interests and ideas and your creative projects, but also your emotional realizations and reflections on your relationships, on your experiences, on your life learnings. Everything is going into that, because when we look at art that truly moves us, it is always something that has come from the innermost place of the artist. The artist has really understood something, really, been honest with themselves, and then been able to convey it in a way that has truly touched us and moved us. So if we want to create art like that, we have to be honest with ourselves. So not only is it important to do things like the Zettelkasten for like the creative part of our lives, but it's also important to do things like the journaling for the emotional part of our lives. So now this is the part where your core learnings, you're just like summarized, very brief. You can just shift that to your Zettelkasten so everything is in one place. Also, you want this to be brief and concise, because when you're sitting with your Zettelkasten and spending time with it for inspiration, or suppose you want to write a piece, you want to film something, you want ideas, and you're looking at your Zettelkasten, you don't want to have to read a whole journal entry. And so it's best if you have your core realizations of the journal entries just summarized. And again, there are no rules here. You can journal a few times a week. You can shift your realizations from your journal entries to your Zettelkasten like once a week. You can sit with the Zettelkasten a couple times a week. Whatever works for you, figure out what works for you and do that accordingly. Also, not every journal entry needs to be transported. Again, this is something that's an intuitive process. When you feel like you've learned something, you've realized something, you've understood something, you don't want to repeat the same mistake, and that is like a core lesson for you, that's when I would say move it to your Zettelkasten, so that stays with you lifelong. This is something that you're gonna build over the time, over the period of months and years, and this is something that is going to then make lasting change in your relationships, in your emotional and mental health, in your creativity, in your art, all of it. Now, if you're someone who hasn't journaled before, or you are kind of stuck when you face the blank page, you don't know what to write, or you can't write a lot, these are some amazing tools that you can use to help yourself. So number one is a website called visualframeworks.com, and basically this is a set of, I think there are like hundreds of visual frameworks and tools. So things like the Venn diagram or mind maps and flowcharts. But the person or the people who run this website are very creative in the way that they come up with their visual tools and frameworks. You can just go to the website, pick literally anyone that interests you, and each of them can be used for a different problem that you're facing in your life, or somewhere where you're stuck and you need to make a decision, or you're feeling lost or confused. They have tags on their website to help you figure out which tools and frameworks can be used for which particular situation. So that is a really helpful tool for your daily reflection, or just whenever you're feeling some type of emotionally heavy way. So that's one thing. And then the next is this reflection toolkit, which I'm going to link in the description. But basically the University of Edinburgh, not sure how to pronounce it, but basically this university came up with a reflection toolkit, and they also have a lot of information about why reflection is helpful in the first place. It's genuinely a very helpful set of resources on reflection and thinking, and there are a bunch of frameworks that are useful over there. My favorite is the 5R framework for reflection, so check that out as well. Okay, we're reaching the end. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is basically what I was talking about in the beginning of the video, which is, so far we've just discussed the first art of being an artist or being a creative, which is how to process, organize, manage, spend time with all of the information that we are getting, and also how to manage our own thoughts, our own emotions to better serve our art and obviously our emotional and mental health as well. But then the other part of it is actually creating the art. So for this, I would say number one, become comfortable with having a lot of projects open at one time, because artists are often multi-passionate people. You have a lot of projects going on at the same time, and if you do not become comfortable with this fact, it'll just become very common to feel guilty all the time for no reason, for not having finished a project. But I think social media presents things in a very fanciful or aesthetic or unrealistic way, where it's like, okay, like I read 30 books this month, or I finished this and I finished that project, and I finished making this film, and I finished writing this book. We don't see the reality, and we don't see what goes on behind that. So like every person is different, everyone's journey is different. That's okay. So be comfortable with the fact that you're going to be interested in a lot of things, and so at the same time you will have a lot of projects at different stages, and they will finish at different times, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. But at the same time, we do need to have some sort of accountability, some sort of management. And so I would say loose time blocking is a good way to practice your art. So instead of rigid time blocking of like this hour to this hour I will do this, instead whatever things you're interested in, just divide it up into times of the day versus like hours of the day. And another way that you could do this is something that I call intuition checking. As I've been following the Zettelkasten system, as I've been following reflection journaling, my own sense of intuition and just knowing myself and being better connected to my mental and physical state has improved a lot. And so as that happens for you, you're going to know what you really want to do. You yourself are aware of like, okay, I want to do this at this time, and so I will not feel guilty about not doing the other thing, and I won't have fixed and rigid timelines. So those are a couple of things that help. And lastly, I would say for the creation itself, however it is that you document your art, or however it is that you're putting your work out there, if you're having trouble with things like consistency or defining what you want your channel to be, defining what you want your medium or your subject to be, I would say again the best thing is always no rigidity and always not fighting resistance. So what this means is, for instance, this channel Reflect, I have not given it a fixed topic of like this is what this channel needs to be. Instead, I was on Blue Sky for a couple of months, and then I felt like short form wasn't my thing, and so now I've switched to YouTube. And on Blue Sky I was writing only about emotional health, and now I'm making videos about different things. And so it should be, art should be, creativity should be about experimentation. And once you are confident that like this is my thing, that is when you can sort of get a better sense of, you know, defining what it needs to be, what your art needs to be, what your medium subject needs to be. But I would say if you have trouble with reconciling yourself to this idea, you can have a timeline of like, say, okay, for 3 months I'm going to give myself a very small goal of just posting on these many days a week, twice a week, once a week, whatever. And for 3 months you'll try that particular niche. And if you feel at any point that that niche is not serving you anymore, you want to talk about something else, make videos about something else, then switch to that and give that a couple of months. Artists can have trouble with perfectionism, and we're too quick to sort of constrain ourselves when creativity is literally supposed to be the opposite of that. It's supposed to be about branching out. That's what Zettelkasten is about. That's what creativity and art should be about, and that's what you are about as well. So don't be afraid of that. Try Zettelkasten out. Let me know if you want me to make a video on the Zettelkasten in detail, how I use it on Remnote. So give Zettelkasten a try. Give these forms of journaling, these frameworks and these tools, give them a try and see how your creativity explodes. Alright, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.